So hi, I'm here in the green zone at COP27, and with me I've got David Marriage and I've got Eric Usher. And if you will quickly to take a moment to introduce who you are, David, and what you do.
Yeah, so David Marriage, work for PwC as looking after disruption and innovation for sustainability. And I'm also working on the Rewriting Extinction program that's supporting bankers for NetZero.
And Eric, do you want to quickly explain to our audience who you are?
Absolutely. So I'm the head of what's called the UN Environment Program's Finance Initiative, UNEP FI, and we are the convener of 3 of the NetZero alliances under GFANZ, specifically the ones dealing with banking, investors or asset owners, and insurance.
And because some of our audience may not know the intricacies of how it all works, do you quickly want to explain what GFANZ is, just so you've got an initial introduction?
So GFANZ is a program, it was launched by Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, to basically get the financial sector stepping up in stating intentions around the need to phase out emissions within their portfolios. And today we have about 40% of the financial industry have set targets, and now it's really about getting it done. So we're working particularly with the banking industry. What does it mean to set a target for 2050? Is not so difficult. It's really in the interim, what does that mean in 2030? What sort of reductions do we need to do, and which parts of the portfolio, and how are we going to do it? So essentially we have these banks, including very much in the UK, the leaders through Bankers for NetZero, figuring out how we're going to get the job done, what sort of standards, approaches, data, how do we work with our customers, and whether these are large corporates to rethink their business models, or whether this is the consumer, the homeowner, in terms of the decisions they can take in terms of how they heat or cool their home, in terms of what sort of vehicle they want to drive. And a lot of it is about the relationship between the bank or the investor and their clients, and how does that relationship evolve over time. And obviously the big worry is a lot is happening, but is it happening fast enough?
And I totally agree with everything you're saying. One of the big things that I would love to hear more about is how do you quantify, how do you get the data from such a disparate range of different businesses all over the world operating in very different ways with many, many supply chains and many, many outlets? How can you gather that data to know that we're on the right path?
Yeah. I think that the first step of the how-to is get started, because the data will never be perfect. You do have to make a lot of judgments along the way, but it's only when you start doing it that you start to really understand where is the value, where are the blockages. And it's really it's not so much an invest or not decision, it's about a relationship with your customer, and essentially at the customer face understanding prerogatives about what they are looking for and what they think they can do, whether it's within their small business, within their home, or their very large corporation. How the role of the financier, the role of the banker or the investor, how do you help them get that done?
That's really interesting, because one of the things that I know that David's been working on is trying to gather that sentiment and gather that understanding from the average person in the street and feed that back up into industry, into government. And David, I don't know if you want to quickly explain what Rewired Earth is doing, what the mission is?
Yeah, no, sure. As Eric says, I mean, one of the key things here is data, really understanding what's going on in an organization through the supply chain. And as you said, the data's not great, and it's difficult to capture. The other thing at the moment, though, is there's some pressure on the system. So almost the more you look, the worse you look. In some instances, if you find things that are going on in your supply chain and report them, you might look worse than somebody who hasn't bothered even looking. So actually, one of the things that we've realised is actually if you can start to bring together the information from the market in terms of the investor, the consumer, the banking relationships you have, what becomes interesting is you start to understand that there are enough people out there with enough capital, whether they're buying things or investing in things, that actually create the value pools for organisations to act. And I think it's that bit where if you're able to join up the consumer markets, the investor markets, with what's going on in a company, but with a view to creating that transparency, then you can make a real difference.
And so with Rewired Earth, if I understand it correctly, what you're doing is you're basically capturing millions of people, you're understanding what they're asking, how they're prioritising those SDGs, and then feeding that back up. Yeah, and so that helps what Eric's doing with his organisation and how they're operating. And is that a fair assumption? And
yeah, obviously what we need is we need leadership from industry, from governments, from the financial sector, but leadership is not enough. It's really about how you get it done. And banks have had environmental and social risk management departments for a long time. They've done a reasonable job of not financing the wrong sort of, a mine that's going to leach cyanide into the water table. That's the basic role of a bank on environmental risks. Today, as we look at climate, it's about every part of the bank integrating these concepts. You can no longer rely on some team who could advise you. You have to embed it within every department, every sectoral part of the organization, within compensation, within strategy. And this is what we're seeing happening. And this is just within the banks or the investors. You need the same thing within the corporates. And so this is about training thousands and tens of thousands of people to understand how do you identify the best opportunities, the opportunities for innovation, the opportunities for working with consumers and understanding what their views are and what their motivations are.
I'd love to ask you very quickly, a lot of the things that as a person in the public space I tend to see is that a lot of the climate conference and the words coming out of it about reducing. Do you think we've got places where we can celebrate and actually reward and thank businesses who are doing the right things?
Well, just to think of the view of the finance sector, the reality is almost every low carbon solution, you shift from a pay-as-you-go model, like a gasoline car, to a higher upfront investment. Now, who plays that role? It's the financial industry. So there are a lot of changes, even at the household level, where we're moving from low capital cost assets to high operating costs, which is usually fossil fuels driven, to investing in household energy systems. And the role of the financier is greater. And it's about identifying where are those opportunities and where is the information that you need with the consumer to understand the economics of making such an upfront investment. So it is all about opportunity.
And also hopefully celebration. So when people do the right thing, we need to give them a platform to say, well done, you've done a good thing. I was going to say, David, do you mind just quickly explaining Reward Earth's role in how you're actually looking to take these businesses and celebrate the work they do and play that back to the public?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things. There's the celebration of the work that's being done, and there's lots of things in that space. But one of the things that will actually make the whole thing move is actually when businesses are rewarded financially for doing the right thing. And if we can get to a model by which, if you think about the Bloomberg number for ESG mandates, by 2025, it's a 50 trillion number. Now, whether you believe the 50 trillion number or not, it's a big number. And we also know that over the next 7 years, there's about 30 trillion of assets that will move from baby boomers to millennials. So during that period, that money definitely becomes more purposeful. Now, if you can understand what that money cares about when you're making these decisions, and what we're seeing in the surveys that we're doing is that 90% of people over 25 care about climate action as one of their top 4 priorities. That's a 45 trillion value pool that will respond in some way to companies that are doing the right thing. Now, as you access that capital pool by demonstrably doing the right thing through your supply chain, that enables you to get the transparency with a level of assurance, your share price may go up. But not only that, you can understand what your customers want because you've got this demand information. You're probably selling more. The banks are looking to differentiate on their rates between, if you like, the debt costs. So because they're trying to reduce their financed emissions, because that's one of the drivers of GFANZ. So we're already seeing a 16 bips differential in lending rates. So as those things happen, profits go up. So as asset values and profits go up, long-term incentive plans kick in, directors get paid more. And so as directors get paid more for doing the right thing, the market becomes the most protective force on the planet, as opposed to one of the potentially seen as one of the more destructive forces on the planet. And it's that flip that makes a big difference.
And I think that's a really beautiful way of summarising actually, that actually people who can often be seen as the bad guys in this world have the opportunity and the capability of actually becoming the heroes of tomorrow. So I just want to finish on one last question. Obviously there's a lot of negative feeling around environmental matters, sometimes negative feelings around these COP events. Do you think that when our children or grandchildren look back to this moment now, do you think they'll be proud of us and what we've achieved?
I hope they will. But I think we have some ways to go to prove them right.
And how about you, David?
Same. I mean, I hope we can. And I think actually starting to engage the public in some of those conversations and asking them for their voices actually gives governments and organisations the ability to act further than they might believe they can if there's the support from clear support from the public.
Yes, I think it's a really good point actually, is that if the information, the data you're gathering at Rewired Earth can be used to give the confidence to businesses and governments to follow policy or to follow changes in their supply chain or whatever, that's a key difference. That's a real kind of step change within the industry.
Yeah.
Thank you both of you. Really appreciate it.
Great.
And
My
all the
pleasure.
best for the rest of COP.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.